Everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. The webinar will start in 2 minutes as we wait for more attendees to join. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are ready to start the webinar. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope all of you and your families are safe. Please feel free to send us your questions in the available chat box. We will cover them during the end of the webinar. So before we start this, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists today. We have Brian Wyszlinski, who joins us from PROS. He heads the strategic partnerships there, and he's a skilled revenue management expert in implementing and operating systems in the airline sector. He then moved to PROS to lead product management team for OND systems, and since then has contributed to the growth of PROS in multiple strategic roles. Next, we have Kieran Brannigan, who is an experienced commercial leader with a background in the airline and retail sectors. As Director of Scheduled Revenue at Ryanair, he was responsible for the revenue management and pricing functions, network strategy, planning, and data-driven system development. Next, we have Robin Chiang, who's the General Manager EMEA at Kayak. He heads the EMEA region based out of London. Previously, Robin led Kayak's APAC business and also spent over a decade in private equity and investment banking. And last but not the least, I'm your moderator today, Shweta Vashisht, Vice President Sales with RateGain. We provide revenue maximization solutions to the travel and hospitality industry. We work with the top 25 OTAs in the world, top 500 hotel chains, airlines, car rentals, and cruises. A quick recap from our previous webinar. Our last webinar was around 9 months back when we were joined by a different set of experts to discuss the state of airline pricing in 2020. The industry at that time was reeling with shutdowns, grounded planes, and a very little passenger traffic, mainly concentrated in China and Southeast Asia. 9 months later, we are definitely in a better position as the world now has multiple vaccine options and over 300 million people have been vaccinated. The industry still has a long way to go. However, the new year has definitely brought some good news to us. So, as we move towards the spring and hope that restrictions will be lowered, it is important for all pricing teams to understand the following. Who is the post COVID airline traveler? Are prices recovering? And if yes, how does that recovery look like? What should pricing teams do about technology? Is there a revenue management checklist for 2021? Before we start, it is important to take a moment and look at where we are in a fight against COVID 19. Since January 2021, more than 300 million vaccines have been rolled out, with Israel, UAE, US, UK, Brazil, and European Union vaccinating the highest number of vaccines amongst 100 people. This is visible in the recovery of the industry as well. as we see in the Skift Recovery Index, which reports that global industry is now at 44% with Middle East, Africa, NORAM, and particularly Russia driving recovery. But what does this recovery look like? And how are the new travelers changing? Let's understand from Robin. Robin, you have been a part of Kayak for over 4 years now, and now handling different markets, giving you a very deep insight into travelers' behavior. What we would like to know from you today is about the change we are now seeing in the traveler and how does this impact airlines and OTAs in building the right pricing strategy.
Thank you. My name's Robin. I head up the EMEA business for Kayak. For those that don't know Kayak, we're one of the world's largest travel search companies. This call is focused on flights, but we also work across other verticals, including cars, hotels, trains, packages, and cruise. Back to the topic at hand. So firstly, how has travel changed during COVID? Interestingly for us, what we see is a change predominantly in travel duration, how long people are going on their trips. We estimate this is because of the cost of traveling in terms of time costs, where quarantine and the difficulties of getting on planes, etc., make it much more palatable if you can take longer trips. So what we've seen, particularly in the orange line here, which is interregional travel or continental travel, is that people are staying away for longer. What's interesting in the EMEA chart that you see on the top right-hand side is that duration actually fell during last summer as government restriction had eased across the region, particularly in continental Europe during that time. So travelers were more willing to take shorter trips as it was less friction in going in and out of their home countries. So that's been sort of what's one of the most interesting aspects of the COVID travel and how much they've changed the way they travel. Secondly, looking at pricing specifically, in general, across most of the regions, we've seen pricing, particularly for longer haul flights, which is the blue line there, and for short haul as well, the pricing fall pretty continuously since COVID pandemic started. The region that bucks that trend is in EMEA, and perhaps those in the audience that work for airports or airlines can give a better sense of why that pricing has gone the other way. But we surmise it is a typical supply-demand issue where European carriers have been much more aggressive in cutting capacity, and perhaps the willingness to travel has surprised on the upside as well in that region. So the supply-demand balance has really moved the other way to push up pricing.
Sure. This is really helpful, Robin. Are there any other broad trends that airline teams might know but are not confirmed about?
Yeah, so interestingly, many things have also changed in how travelers prioritize what they care about as they get on the road. Last minute travel, I think, is well documented, and we see that for us as well. Opportunistic bookings based on upcoming restrictions in their home countries, as well as opportunistic pricing where there's been sudden price drops with particular routes or carriers. Users are also engaging with Kayak's flexible filters. So these are filters that show results as to which flights are the most flexible. And that is really top of mind for many travelers right now. More upper funnel, our users are always also engaging with Kayak's COVID Hub. For those that haven't seen it, it's a map of 215 countries that's updated daily with restrictions and travel requirements. And it's often quoted as one of the most reliable sources of travel restrictions, for example, by Forbes. So we see that as pretty interesting in that, yes, it does show a willingness to travel, whether there is ability to travel right now. Sustainability, taking a little bit of a back seat with COVID, with flexibility now front of mind and safety front of mind. But we expect that to come back, particularly in the Nordic countries where sustainability is extremely important to travelers in that region. And the workation that we've seen, and some of that is why we've seen longer durations in people's trips. Domestic workations, where they work from different locations within their countries. Also overseas travel, like Bermuda offering work from abroad visas to induce travelers to stay longer overseas and work from a beach as opposed to work from home. And lastly, we've seen rental car demand. While this is a flight call, we do see a lot more interest in rental cars, particularly during the summer months, where people are taking the car and sort of hopping on a plane to take their holiday. For example, for kayak, we've defaulted the front door vertical to be car. So when you come to kayak, oftentimes you'll see car as opposed to flights, and that's the first time that's happened sort of in the history of our business, where we've been particularly more flights focused. There's been some changes. So it's been interesting to see that in the past 12 months also.
Sure. Thank you, Robin. Before we end your session, Robin, I wanted to ask you that with most of us being at home through 2020, has there been a change in the browsing behavior of travelers? Could you throw some light on the preference of travelers between direct versus OTAs and mobile versus desktop?
Yeah, so I can't talk about booking holdings or kayak numbers specifically, but in terms of, and we're a small slice of the larger flights market, but in terms of general trends, I think it's well documented that mobile continues to be increasingly important. And I don't think COVID behavior changes will make much of a dent in that longer term trend. In terms of OTAs versus direct to airlines, I think in general as well, what we hear from the market is actually more about sort of staying the same. There's a section of the traveling public that are very lower to OTAs, and there's a section of traveling public that's very lower to airlines. And we don't think COVID will derail that too much over the longer term.
Great. Thank you, Robin. I'm sure a lot of pricing managers would agree with your insights, and it also reiterates the importance of being on top of their market to ensure they don't miss the last minute travel demand. After learning the changes OTAs are seeing at their end, in the next section, we will see how have global and local restrictions, demand from domestic as well as international markets impacted airline pricing. As per the latest report released by IATA, we see that while airlines recovery was on course till December, however, with latest restrictions imposed in Europe as well as with China restricted movement during the Chinese New Year, for the first time since April, recovery for airlines went south. This correlates exactly with the tightening of restrictions in South Asia, China, Australia, and Europe. Due to these restrictions, we see that a spike that started building up around the holiday season in all regions flattened out, impacting demand and pricing both. The data scientist team at RateGain analyzed over 500 ONDs across the world, and today I'm sharing the preview of that with everyone in this webinar. We would soon be coming out with a detailed report to help you and your teams plan better for summer. But for now, here are some insights we wanted to share with you. Here we see the relative change in prices between October 2020 to April 21, showing the routes that have been worst recovery over the last 6 months. It is no surprise that most of the ONDs that are showing slow recovery are majorly from Europe, with one exception of a route from Cincinnati to Newark. Most other ONDs are from Central Europe to Southern Europe that would have been expecting travelers to head out during spring, but due to the lockdown, not seeing an uptick in recovery and hence no recovery. Next, we move to the OTAs that have been performing the best in the last 6 months. Once again, this chart shows the relative improvement in fares as compared to the previous month. As you would see, that in line with IATA data, fares dipped drastically between January and February. While we see India, China feature prominently, we also see to our surprise European routes that are recovering well. Finally, to the point made earlier by Robin, we see which routes have been the most volatile, and we clearly cannot see any pattern here as well. Across Europe, China, India, we see volatile fares over the last 6 months, making it extremely important for airline revenue managers to look at the pricing in real time. So, what does this mean for pricing teams? While we reopening will re- while reopening will drive recovery, demand would be uncertain and mostly appear in a short period of window. Tech providers need to think of alternative ways of forecasting demand accurately. Lastly, ancillaries will become key to revenue as short haul and domestic flights continue to be a major driver of demand. Talking about price volatility, one company that has been partnering very closely with airlines to help them track is Pros. And we have Brian, head of strategic partnerships, with us again. Brian, you were in our first webinar as well, where we discussed the state of airline pricing. And at that time, you confirmed that the revenue management systems and current technology will need to be upgraded to tackle the volatility in the new normal. So, Brian, 9 months later, what are revenue teams telling you at Pros?
Thank you, Shweta. It's always great to participate with you and the RateGain team in these webinars. You know, revenue management is changing rapidly as we come out of COVID and into recovery. And what we're learning is that the old paradigm of revenue management solutions, looking at historical data to forecast demand, is really changing. So airlines are really looking for new sources of data to predict demand. As Robin talked about, the booking curve is shortening. It's becoming much closer to departure. And in this, we need to find new ways of predicting what demand will look like. In addition, we need to look at other sources or triggers that show us when demand is going to spike. For example, when a country opens up for travel, you suddenly see a large spike in demand. And we need to be able to, as revenue managers, to anticipate that and use what new sources of data we can. So things like shopping data are becoming very important for revenue management solutions, whereas they had not been before. The other thing is, as your chart showed in the previous section, is that demand is coming back online. And as airlines anticipate this demand coming back online, supply is probably going to recover faster than demand. We typically see these in these type of recovery situations. And what this leads to is rapid changes in the pricing environment. And I think that this makes competitive intelligence information like that provided by RateGain much more important than ever. And to be able to integrate that competitive intelligence with your revenue management solution. So, you know, I think that these are the 3 points that really that we're hearing from the marketplace. Recently, Pros and RateGain entered into a partnership where it makes it easier to integrate this data in the revenue management solutions, where data provided by RateGain can be loaded directly into the revenue management solutions and used for decision support and action by the analyst community.
Great. Thank you, Brian. It's great to know about the partnership. I think everyone should know about it. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And Brian, do you see an acceleration of digital transformation in the industry due to COVID? And what kind of initiatives have you come across since we spoke last?
Yes. So, in addition to revenue management solutions and the evolution of revenue management solutions, one of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace is, airlines to be innovative. This gives airlines a perfect opportunity to reinvent themselves, to look at the way that they're doing things, and to try new solutions. So some of the areas that we're seeing the most information or the most requests for is dynamic and continuous pricing. This provides airlines with more flexibility in the way that they price, the way that they change prices, by adding additional price points into that curve, and no longer being subjected or regulated by discrete price points. I believe my friend Kieran is going to talk a little bit more about this in his section after mine. Another area is what we call dynamic offers. So this is being able to provide real-time pricing and shopping options for customers, whether they come through a website, other digital channels, OTAs, and the sort. But being able to respond to those requests very quickly, being able to carry statistics as well on those requests so that they can feed back into the revenue management solution. And then the third area is probably the broadest area, which is digital or e-commerce solutions that need to be flexible enough to capture more of the customer's wallet share. The airline industry was changing before COVID, where airlines were no longer just offering seats; they were offering seats and a lot more services. So we're seeing that evolution in that the airline's digital or e-commerce offering is being that one-stop shop for customers to make their travel plans. And I think that you're going to continue to see that trend moving forward.
I agree. Before we get into the next section, let's understand from our audience. There's a small poll which everyone will get, and it's about what challenges is your airline looking to solve in 2021. If everyone can please select. We'll give a minute for this. Okay, looks like we are ready. We can see the results now. Thank you everyone for participating. Here you see all the options which we had. So we see 50% audience thinking that define new sources of data to predict demand is the biggest challenge for their teams. 38% to make it easier to monitor market changes, and 12% think investment in AI ML to build own forecasting engine. Hope this is helpful for everyone. Great, thank you. Kiaran, as you have been a part of one of the most successful airlines in Europe, and that would have come with its own fair share of its challenges, today pricing teams on this webinar need to learn from your experience to know what should they change in their day-to-day routine to stay on top of recovery.
Thank you, Shweta. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks, Brian and Robin, for an interesting view of what we're seeing across the market and what revenue management system providers are doing to address the problems that that revenue management teams have faced over the past year. If you go to the next slide there, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the impact that the pandemic has had on the field of revenue management and pricing. And as Brian touched on, some of the main features and tools that revenue managers used to manage flights and to deal with their inventory have largely become irrelevant in the past year. Historical data was, really the key feature of a lot of revenue management systems. It was the driver behind the forecasts and the expected bookings that most systems predicted. And overnight, that data became irrelevant when we entered into the pandemic last year. Similarly, we've seen an impact on booking profiles, as Robin showed in his presentation. The booking profiles have changed considerably in the past year. So again, a traditional way that revenue management teams segment their price is based on the time to departure. And that's fallen away over the past year with booking windows condensed into very short windows. It's very difficult to differentiate and to segment prices in that environment. So revenue management teams have had to face up to those challenges of how do they now deal with their booking curve? How do they now estimate and respond to demand without the guidance of historical data to help them? They've also had to deal with the shifting regulations from governments and the impact that has had on demand. And we've seen that that's probably been the single biggest impact on demand, is that when governments shut down certain travel corridors, when they implement testing regimes or quarantines, that overnight there is a huge shift in demand and potentially a huge fall off in demand. And similarly, as we now move out of the worst of the pandemic, that's going to offer an opportunity as countries open back up. But you need to be set up to deal with it and to respond to the demand. And as the poll just showed, I think a lot of revenue management teams have struggled with what other data can we use to help us. With the loss of historic data, what can we use to help and guide us? And I think it was interesting that the poll pointed that most people out there are looking for what other data sources can help them predict demand, because it's certainly been a huge gap for revenue managers in the past year. And finally, they've had to work a lot closer across the whole commercial landscape. We're now dealing with, if I touch on some of the other areas within commercial teams, we're now looking at network planning teams who are often reissuing schedules on a weekly basis rather than traditionally once or twice a year as it used to be. And in dealing with that kind of very fluid situation, they're leaning on their revenue management colleagues to guide them in terms of what routes should we be flying, what capacity should we be adding to it. And it's really important to get that up-to-date information as to what's actually selling at the moment, what are customers actually looking for at the moment in terms of making those decisions. Next.
Sure. Kiaran, it is expected that summer of 2021 would help in driving further recovery. What should pricing managers do to not lose momentum and make the most of the surge?
I think recovery is coming in 2021. Next. So next slide. Recovery will come in 2021. I think the shape of it, though, is going to be very volatile, and revenue management teams need to be very flexible in terms of how they deal with that and how they're set up for that. It's certainly going to be a bumpy recovery. I think as we emerge out of the pandemic, it's probably likely that there will, be localized outbreaks. There'll be setbacks and government, changes in government regulation that will set back the recovery in certain markets. So it's important that teams remain very agile and dynamic in terms of how they deal with demand and how they approach it. From a systems perspective, I think, if you haven't already done it, I think, it's not too late now to evaluate your current systems position, to look at how, what information you have in your revenue management system. And I think a lot of revenue managers will look and say, okay, my revenue management system is very reliant on internal data and historic data. And that's maybe not fit for purpose in the current environment in helping them manage the current environment. So look through the system, look at what the gaps are in your system and see how you can best kind of fill those gaps. And this is where I think working across the organization is the first step that will help a lot of revenue managers, because I think for a long time, commercial teams and airlines have worked in a very siloed manner, in that, there are different systems across different functions, and they're all looking at different metrics and different measures of success. And I think that there will actually be a lot of information within the airline that revenue managers aren't currently tapping into, that will actually help them navigate the current difficulties. And I can reflect back on my own experience within Ryanair and looking at some of the data that we had within the marketing team, in terms of data that came from our own website and our own customers' shopping behavior. And that gave a great insight into a different side of the business, but it wasn't necessarily something that was within the revenue management function. So getting your hands on that data and talking to colleagues across across marketing and across the other functions can be a huge help. And you'll be surprised at the additional value that they can add in terms of data that you didn't have access to yet within the revenue management team, but that is there within the airline and can help in terms of the decision-making support. If I was to give a kind of a checklist for revenue managers on a day-to-day basis, I think first and foremost would be to really evaluate your bookings and check your bookings on a daily basis. In the past, it's often been sufficient to look at booking trends on a weekly or sometimes even longer time frame. But given the changes we've seen in the past 12 months and the shortening of those booking windows, I think it's really important that evaluating the bookings across each route and across each market is really something that needs to be performed on a day-to-day basis. It will highlight trends. It will highlight new problems that may be emerging. It'll highlight new opportunities that are emerging. And I think it's definitely something revenue managers need to do on a daily basis and set up alerts for when there are deviations to trends, so that they can look into them in more detail. And perhaps that's the beginning of a recovery, or perhaps it's a problem. I think more than ever, and again, Brian touched on this, competitive data is really important. Without the aid of historical data and very stable booking trends, it's really important to know what the competitors are doing, because it's one of the key benchmarks that you can actually look at and see, where am I in this marketplace? Am I where I think I should be in terms of price? Because perhaps things are happening faster than you're anticipating, and so it's really important to get that data. And particularly with the very short booking windows, it's really important that data is as fresh as possible. So, when we're looking at an environment where for many airlines, up to 50%, sometimes more of your bookings are happening within the last 2 weeks. So it's really not sustainable to be uncompetitive for even a day within that period. So having really fresh competitive data, perhaps in that very close-in window, getting that data refreshed multiple times per day so that you're right up to date with that data is really important for a revenue management team. In terms of booking data, we've seen, again, with a lot of revenue management systems, the processes rely on an overnight or, a nightly update process to refresh the data in the system. And again, just given that very short booking window that we now face, maybe that's not fresh enough to allow you to analyze the trends. So I would certainly recommend to revenue managers that you get some kind of feed of data as to what's happening during the day. I don't think it's sufficient to wait until the next day until you see what's happened. So if it's possible to integrate that within your revenue management system, that's great. But I think in the interim period, revenue managers are going to have to look at a lot of workarounds to get additional data feeds, and even if that means having data feeds that run side by side with the revenue management system, I think there's value in having that, because it's really important that you know what's happening throughout the day, that if there are changes and trends, that you can see them as they emerge and can then take action on them. We mentioned the kind of shopping data and maybe the data that's available from internal sources. So, talk to your marketing colleagues, your e-commerce colleagues about what data they can provide from your own website in terms of what customers are looking for, what they're shopping for, where they drop out in terms of the booking process, because that can give you some great clues as to what customers are interested in, and and maybe the reasons why they're not purchasing at this moment in time. And from an external point of view, there's lots of data outside of the company which can also help. And we mentioned the competitive data. I think one of the key bits of data that I don't see a lot of revenue management systems include is capacity data. And I think as we emerge from the pandemic, that's going to be a really important one, because one of the trends we've seen over the last number of months is that all airlines are shifting capacity to where they think the recovery will start first. So, we've seen, certainly in Europe and North America, we've seen a lot of capacity move towards kind of beach and leisure destinations, because it's widely anticipated that they're going to recover first from the effects of the pandemic. But that can have a huge impact on a revenue manager's perspective of how the route will perform. If everyone adds capacity to what was previously a strong route, then we're very quickly into an oversupply situation. So it's really important to get that feed of what our competitors doing on capacity, and whether that's entering markets or leaving markets. That can be a huge influence in terms of the potential for a given route. And other external data sources are really useful as well. I mean, Robin touched on some of the things that they're seeing in the world of kind of OTAs and meta searchers. And I think for airlines that work with those providers, they can give another really good steer in terms of how you're benchmarking relative to the market. Is your airline achieving the kind of conversion rates maybe that others are? If that data is available, then that can be a really good addition to the suite of information that you have available. And finally, but probably the most important piece of data that revenue managers need to keep an eye on is that regulatory environment. Because I think the biggest changes we've seen in demand have come when governments have changed the regulations, either around the ease of access or the shutdown of certain markets. And being really up to date with that information is key, because it can be critical in the success or the failure of a given route. So that's something that needs to be reflected. I think for airlines that deal with multiple international countries, opening up the dialogue with people that can give you a steer of what's happening in other markets. I mean, you may be sitting in one country, but if a large part of your airline's network touches on other countries, then it's important to have that dialogue with the sales team or whoever is kind of up to date with the recent trends in that country, because we've seen, I think, with the UK announcement recently of their roadmap to recovery and how they're going to drop restrictions. We saw a huge spike in bookings from the UK to leisure destinations across Europe. I think it's indicative of what can happen when markets open up. And I think it's important that revenue managers are really set up and ready for that recovery when it occurs. Okay.
Great. Great. Thank you, Karen. I'm sure all these insights are helpful for all the pricing teams here who are attending the webinar. Just going back on the poll, Karen, Brian, and Robin, with the results which we see there, it would be nice to understand your point of view or your views on, on the results. We can just bring that back on the screen just so that you guys know. Here.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting answer. I mean, it's interesting that that there was a range of different answers. I think if we'd have asked, the participants, would they want all these three things? I think they would probably have said yes to all of them. But it was interesting to see how they prioritized them. I think from my perspective, as previously working in that environment and wondering how I would have navigated this particular challenge. I think definitely having different sources of data. I think that the biggest challenge that teams have faced over the past year is that loss of a guide. And historical data was a very good guide in previous stable times, and the loss of that guide as to how you should be performing, and giving you a quick alert if you're not performing in line with that guide. I think that's been a real loss for revenue managers in the last year, and having some other sources of data to help them predict demand and to see are they in the right place relative to the market. I think that is the biggest challenge that they're facing at the minute.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it's finding the right data set that is a good predictor of what will happen to bookings. There's a lot of data sets out there. Some of them may be indicative, some of them may not. So it's finding those right data sets that are the best signals for what's going to happen to demand. So at Pros, that's where we're spending a lot of our research time now, is what are those best sets of data that can signal what's going to happen to demand in future, and then measuring against that. So, one of the questions that was in there was, well, what about this data set, or what about that data set? It's really finding the right one and using that information. I do agree with Kieran, though, is that all three of these are very, very important. I think the first and the third go hand in hand, is being able to find new data sets and then being able to use machine learning that will adapt with changes in those data sets.
And I think localizing which data sets you use down to the sort of larger markets is going to be important. In the short term, I think data sets will be one important aspect, but we believe that news will drive a lot of demand, news including regulatory news. So we've seen that play out in some of the data as well. So I think sort of hold on to your chairs for a little bit of volatility, as it's hard to predict when borders open or close, or quarantines get implemented. But that is going to be important data in terms of data as well for looking at demand.
Great. Thank you to all the panelists. I would now request the audience to share their questions to the panelists to answer. I can start with what I already have there. Okay, I think the first one which I see is from Sudhir, which is very specific to Pros, it seems. So Brian, you might have to take this one. Any Pros study carried out for group travel in any shape or specific segment? Brian, are you there? Brian, we can't hear you, sorry.
Oh, sorry. We haven't looked at particular segments of the market. It's been more trying to predict demand based on different components. I think that, as Robin said, is understanding when borders are going to open or close, and when those triggers happen is what happens to demand. We haven't gotten into subsegments like when is group traffic going to return. There was another question about visiting friends and relatives, the VFR traffic, some of that, does happen. But I think that, the overarching is, whether you can travel or not. And that's really up to what the governments do. And when they open the borders, what does opening look like? Do you still have to quarantine for 14 days? Do you still have to take COVID tests every 72 hours? What is the cost that you must bear as a traveler? That all gets wrapped into those decisions as to whether I'm going to travel or not. But as Kieran mentioned, when Boris Johnson had his press conference a couple of weeks ago and says we're on this path to opening up the UK, there was a huge spike in demand. So it's being able to understand, what those changes are and how they trigger demand when it happens, and then as revenue managers, how do we react to that?
Great. Thank you, Brian. Next question, I think, Brian, you might have to take that one as well. It's from Igor. Are there intentions to go further than only including competitor data into pro system landscape for the purpose of decision support? Are there methods in development that can support or automate it?
So at Pros, we do have functionality that leverages competitive data to be able to provide decision support and also automate rules as far as matching availability. So those are already in the system, and they're already used by airlines. Some of the additional work that we're doing is where can competitive data be used in additional sets or additional functionalities like customer willingness to pay, and that work is in research right now.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Next question we have from Olena. Which ancillary services can be on demand for 2021? Kieran, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to understand the question properly, I mean, I think in terms of which ancillaries are going to be popular in 2021, I think that the trends we've already seen, since the start of the pandemic has certainly seen for a lot of airlines an increase in the uptake of products like assigned seating, like those kind of priority boarding or speedy boarding queues, things that help kind of ease the experience of the journey. So, maybe it's giving you a bit more personal space on the flight. Maybe it's kind of, avoiding long queues. And I think they're the kind of things that people have probably been a little concerned about if they were traveling during the pandemic, is to try and minimize their risk. And I think once customers have kind of trialed a lot of those products, they tend to stick with them again the next time they travel. So I think that there probably will continue to be a strong uptake in those products, and I think probably assigned seating and any of those kind of security fast tracks or priority boarding type products are really the ones that will benefit most from this.
Thank you, Kieran. Next question we have from Aruna. Where does customer behavior data fit here? Job losses also could have an impact. How can that data be added? Robin?
Yeah, I think.
Yep, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go for Robin if you. Yeah.
Yeah, for us, we haven't looked longer term. It's difficult to predict a lot of the macro into sort of how we look at demand going forward, because also that is fast changing, right? We've seen GDP's whipsaw like we've never seen before in history. So for us, we haven't, without clarity, we haven't taken that into account too much. We're looking more short and medium term, and as I mentioned, regulatory and news has been a bigger factor than most other macro trends so far.
Sure, Robin. Kieran, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, no, I think Robin's kind of right there in terms of we haven't seen the long-term impact of this. I mean, there are a number of factors here, though, in that, while there has been a big increase in unemployment throughout the pandemic, we also see a lot of economic indicators such as, a huge increase in the rate of savings, because customers haven't been able to spend money in other outlets and in other means. So I think there, maybe there's a kind of a two-tier recovery in that, those that have kind of kept their jobs through the pandemic, are going to come out of this with savings in the bank and with a strong pent-up demand to travel again. But I think there probably is a longer tail to the economic story, coming out of the pandemic. I think, governments have certainly had to borrow huge amounts of money, and at some point that's likely to have an impact in terms of the overall economic environment.
Yeah, I agree with that. Is that what is the long-term effect of this? As Kieran said, governments have put a lot of money out there. What impact is it going to have on inflation? What impact is it going to have on taxes? Because that money doesn't come for free. So there may be a long tail recovery in this, as we have to pay for this, pay for these economic boosts in 2022 and beyond.
Great, awesome, Aruna. I hope that was helpful. Next question we have from Alisa. That's for Brian. Could you discuss further the difference between continuous or dynamic pricing and the concept of dynamic offers?
Sure. So dynamic pricing or continuous pricing is being able to price completely along a curve, as opposed to using discrete price points as we do now. Dynamic offers is what we call our pricing, shopping, merchandising solutions. So we're still in this hybrid world where dynamic pricing or continuous pricing is being trialed by many airlines, but the existing paradigm or the existing methodology is still using discrete price points for most airlines that they file through ATPCO. So dynamic offers is that pricing, shopping solutions, whereas dynamic pricing is more along the continuous curve.
Sure. Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
Next question we have from Andres. Do you see vaccination passports, either from countries or from the airline themselves, as a future tool for airlines to benefit in revenue management? Who can pick this up? Karen, Brian, Robin?
Yeah, I think, it's a possible way to recovery and to instill that kind of confidence in customers who've had a vaccine that they can travel. But I worry a little bit about the length of time that something like this would take to roll out, and particularly if we're talking about the prospects of short-term recovery in 2021. I think that's the type of, or the amount of time a rollout of a worldwide system of vaccination passports, which we'd really need. I'm not sure if I see that as something that's realizable in the short term. So I think for sure they would, and there's certainly conversations going on in a lot of countries about whether they can use that as a tool to open up tourism and to open up flights again. But I do worry and wonder about the length of time it would actually take to roll out a comprehensive system.
Yeah, in general, what we're seeing in the market is different airlines and countries are setting different standards. I think anything that lowers the friction of travel is positive for demand, and definitely better than sort of closing borders everywhere where it has been really in the last 12 months. Clearly, the lesser admin, the better, but perhaps this is a good interim step. In terms of benefit to revenue management, I think, yeah, it's probably just that. It provides less friction to increasing demand.
I agree with Robin. I think it's an interim step to restart travel, whether it's tourism. I think at some point we're going to get to or at some point in the future, we're going to get to a point where governments, tourism authorities are just going to want the money, and that friction is going to subside or completely go away.
Great. Okay, next question we have from Alexandra. Besides webfare data, have you identified other external data sources on the web that could help pricing and revenue management team to make better decisions in current environment? Brian, do you want to pick this up? Because it might.
Sure. So, I think that there's a lot that can be read from shopping data, because shopping data really is intent to purchase, and how shopping data links to actual bookings. So, traditionally revenue management solutions are built on past bookings. So, what are the steps before that? And for the first time, we really have great information on shopping. So I think that's actually a very good predictor of intent to purchase, which would be demand. So, those are some of the research areas that we're looking at, is what can we leverage from a shopping standpoint. Again, that data set is far larger. So it takes a lot of machine learning to be able to get to the right triggers or the right signals for predicting demand. But I think that's probably the next big data set that people are going to start using for predicting demand.
Right. And that actually answers Rasika's question, what sources do you currently use to predict demand as well?
Yeah. And I think that ties into a point that Kieran made in his talk, is that it's, working. This has really allowed us to remove barriers between departments, and, working with your marketing colleagues to get the data. That data sometimes resides in the marketing department, and to be able to leverage those data sets across the whole organization.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Next question we have from Moina. Price promotions. Do you see them as demand stimulating given the current circumstances, or not yet? Delusion only.
Yeah, I think
Rob,
that this is.
Do you want to pick this up? Go ahead. Anyone can answer.
Sorry, there's a delay on the line. I think this depends on the market. I think for markets that still have substantial kind of shutdowns and substantial restrictions in place, then I think it is probably a case of not yet, because while there may be a strong intent and a strong demand to travel, if the restrictions are so strong, then there's no way around it in some markets. But I think as we move into the recovery phase and the restrictions are dropped, price is going to be a strong lever that airlines are going to pull in order to get volume moving again, to get cash back into the business and to stimulate bookings. So I think, it depends on the phase of recovery that individual markets are at. It's certainly going to be a big tool as we go into recovery. But if you're still in kind of very strong lockdown mode, then there's probably not much point in running big price promotions in that kind of environment.
Sure. Next question we have from Sharad. Robin mentioned how bookings are made last minute considering travel restrictions by each country. Do airlines still need future-looking fare data for 120 or 150 days out, or should they just focus on 30 to 45 days out? Robin?
Yeah, for us, if we talk about sort of shopping data, we look at searches on our site, and the booking window is both shortened and lengthened. So typically it's been sort of 6 weeks out, depending on country. But now it's much shorter, but people are also looking further, so looking out to summer as well. So the long dated searches and demand, I think you still need to look at very carefully.
Thank you, Robin. Next question we have from Nandagopal. IATA Travel Pass, vaccine passport to drive travel in the short while and impact supply and pricing. What are your thoughts?
I think we've answered this earlier.
Yes.
It
Okay.
creates less friction in general.
Perfect. Perfect. Next question is from Ignacio. Do you see flexibility as a key condition on a medium long term on the leisure segment, or you think it's just circumstantial under travel restrictions are waived? Until travel restrictions are waived, how can we make the most of it and monetize it correctly without diluting potential business traffic? Robin?
I think it's hard to predict sort of the long tail what front of travelers' minds, but definitely in the short term, while health concerns are still there, and whether that's a real concern or it's just the confidence around travelers and how safe they feel, it's going to be top of mind. So I think the short answer is medium term. The need for flexibility is going to be there, particularly if other airlines and OTAs are offering that. It's hard to see who's going to take that off first.
Thank you, Robin. Next question is from Kajal. How does the digital integrated travel certificates help airlines in future? So like the COVID negative test reports are inbuilt into travel itineraries in future to boost passengers' confidence. Karen, you want to answer this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a similar vein to the other questions we've had around vaccine passports and that kind of thing. Is that it's very much about kind of giving some confidence in the market and giving confidence to airlines to open up and customers that they have the the requisite kind of documents in order to travel in the current environment.
Great, thank you, Karen. Next question, looking at the time, we'll cover next 2-3 questions. We have many though, I think in the chat box as well. So, but we'll try to, cover most of it. Next question is from Olena. Some industry resources predict the end of dynamic pricing and the appearance of customer-centric pricing. What is Pro's point of view on this? When can it happen, and is Pros ready for this times? That's an interesting question for you, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I think customer-centric and dynamic pricing are probably one and the same. And the work that we're doing in dynamic pricing and willingness to pay is, I think, towards that vein in customer-centric. In addition, from a customer-centric really comes into play when it when you're looking at what offers to present in the digital space, and knowing the customer, who the customer is, and what they traditionally buy is the most important part of that.
Right. Thank you, Brian. Next question is from Kajal. Which customer segments, business, leisure, will most likely recover soon? I think Robin, looking at the search data, maybe at Kayak as well, how it is trending and how do you see it would happen? I think if you feel comfortable taking this up.
Yeah, I think there's lots of pent-up demand for both. So as audience will look at what their needs are, they both would love to go on holiday somewhere one day, but there's also business relationships you want to build. So we don't believe that there's a difference sort of in which one will recover quicker. It's going to be not an immediate recovery for both, but there's demand for both business and leisure travel. We've just launched a Kayak for Business product that hopefully will take advantage of the business demand as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody said that corporate travel was dead, that there were so many other tools. Well, I think what this has shown is that it's more important to get out and see your customers, see your prospects, that nothing replaces the face-to-face meeting. Business demand will be, I think, a little slower than leisure demand, just because the risk, if in leisure, you assume as a leisure passenger, but if you're traveling for business, some of that risk is borne by the company. So I think business traffic will come back, but it'll be slower, but I think it's going to come back just as it was before.
Right, absolutely. And I'm sure everyone is looking forward for that.
Yeah, I am.
Great. And we'll just cover the last question for today. And apologies to everyone, for the questions which we can't cover now. Whatever we have in the chat box, all the questions, we'll send answers to you guys later. But looking at the time, we'll just go for the last one here. How will the current situation impact the relationships with TMCs? Kieran, you want to take this up?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things over the past 12 months is that airlines have maybe had become a lot less picky about where their bookings are coming from. So nurturing the kind of relationships they have right across the board, be that with OTAs, be that with with other sources. We've seen load factors drop in most markets by 10-20%, sometimes more. So I think nurturing the kind of relationships right across the board has become important to all airlines. And I think as things recover, they'll hang on to that. As I say, we're going to have a somewhat bumpy recovery, and wherever demand is, I think airlines are going to try and capitalize on that. And so you do see some airlines kind of opening the doors again to avenues that previously they weren't engaging with.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Kieran. And thank you so much, everyone, once again. And thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing their insights and our audience for their questions. Hope this session was helpful. At RateGain, we have a lot of interesting things lined up in the next few weeks for you that are aimed to solve your demand prediction challenges. Stay tuned and watch out our State of Airline report coming out very soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day ahead.